Caitlyn. What's the status of your health right now, and what specifically injury-wise between the ankle and the groin was it that prevented you from coming back this year?
Yeah, honestly, I've been working really hard to get back to full health, and I feel like probably over these...
Something changed women's basketball program on earth. No one saw it ending like this. Not the Federation's top executives, not the veteran players, not the journalists who've spent their careers covering this sport. The full scope of what was coming caught nearly everyone off guard. But looking back now with the advantage of you earn your place, you show deference to those who came before you. You prove yourself within the system before the system welcomes you in. It's a meritocracy. Yes, but a meritocracy with a long memory, one that prizes loyalty, honors institutional history, and moves on its own timeline, regardless of what's happening in the sports commercial world beyond its walls. Caitlyn Clark didn't ease into the WNBA the way most athletes do. There was no quiet adjustment period, no gradual build, no humble patience, precisely where the conflict was always destined to emerge. Because Team USA basketball operates within a hierarchy. It has an established culture, a chain of command, and firm expectations about how younger players earn their standing. Now, Cheryl Reeve had spent years helping build that culture. As head coach of the Minnesota Lynx, as an Olympic assistant, and as someone who had lived inside elite women's basketball for decades, Reeve understood what championship-level teams required. Her methods were proven. Her standards were absolute. Her commitment to the veterans who had delivered gold medals for their country was genuine, deep, and unwavering. She had witnessed firsthand what happens when teams chase individual profiles at the expense of collective chemistry. She had seen how quickly programs unravel when decisions are made for the wrong reasons. Her coaching philosophy wasn't about protecting turf, it was about winning. Then came the Olympic roster. When Caitlyn Clark's name was absent from the Team USA roster for the Paris 2024 Olympics, and the reaction was instant and fierce. People weren't simply disappointed, they were outraged. Fans, analysts, former players, casual observers who had never followed Olympic basketball in their lives all asked the same question. How do you leave out the most talked-about player in the sport? How do you assemble a team meant to represent the pinnacle of American women's basketball and exclude the athlete who had single-handedly brought millions of new viewers to the game? The backlash didn't stay within basketball circles. It spilled into mainstream sports media, into entertainment coverage, into political commentary, where Clark's omission was held up as evidence of institutions resisting inevitable change. What should have been a sports debate became a full cultural flashpoint. The official explanation was measured and procedural. The roster had been built on established criteria. Veterans had earned their places through years of international competition. The coaching staff had made a basketball decision, not a commercial one. That was the position. That was what people were expected to accept. And for those inside the program, the coaches, the veteran players, the Federation officials who understood the full picture, the reasoning was defensible. These were seasoned international competitors. The system had been delivering results. The process was the process. But the public doesn't operate inside any process. The public moves on emotion, on narrative, on the instinctive feeling that something deeply wrong had been done to someone they had come to care about. What followed was one of the most relentless, sustained waves of backlash the WNBA had ever directed at a single individual. Cheryl Reeve sat at the center of it. As the coach most visibly connected to the decision-making structure that kept Clark off the roster, she became the target of a wave of criticism that went well past reasonable sports debate. Her social media became an ongoing battlefield. Old statements were dug up and twisted. Every interview, every comment she made about the selection process was picked apart and weaponized by an audience that had already decided who she was and what she had done. The accusations went beyond questioning her coaching judgment. They attacked her integrity. They framed her as jealous of Clark's rise, resentful of the commercial energy Clark had brought to a league Reeve had spent decades building. It was relentless. It was deeply personal. And whatever your position on the roster decision itself, no one working in professional sports should have to endure that as part of doing their job. But here's what the public narrative missed entirely. Here's what the noise drowned out. There were players on that Olympic roster, players who had competed alongside and against Caitlyn Clark, who had their own complicated, layered feelings about how everything had played out. Because the WNBA locker room, like every elite athletic environment, has its own internal dynamics. And when the outside world declared that Clark had been wronged, when the story hardened into a clean moral fable of the brilliant young star being sabotaged by a jealous establishment, something essential got stripped from the picture. The nuance disappeared. The genuine human complexity of the situation, the fact that real people with real careers and real emotions were caught inside this story, got flattened into a villain and hero framework the internet could easily package and share. The reality, as it almost always is in situations like this, was considerably messier. There were veterans who felt that the firestorm over Clark's omission had unfairly tainted the legitimacy of their own hard-earned achievements. There were players who had spent a decade grinding toward Olympic status, only to find themselves cast as villains in a story they had no role in shaping and no real platform to address. There were private conversations happening inside the program about team dynamics, about chemistry, or about the genuine challenge of incorporating a transformative newcomer into a unit forged through years of shared experience that the public never had access to and never would. The full picture simply saw everyone involved. Through all of it, Cheryl Reeve kept coaching. She kept working. She kept her focus locked on the one thing she had always controlled, the quality of the team she put on the floor. And Team USA won gold in Paris. The team she helped construct, the veterans she stood behind, the program she represented, they went to France and they won decisively against elite international competition under a global spotlight made even harsher by the controversy that had come before the games. And the results spoke clearly. The performance was impossible to dismiss. By every competitive measure that matters in international basketball, the process had been validated. So why then are we talking about a quiet exit? Because winning a gold medal doesn't always resolve what lies underneath. Sometimes it just postpones the reckoning. Sometimes the gold sits on the shelf while the fault lines keep widening, hidden from the outside world until the moment they can no longer hold. The weeks after Paris should have been a celebration. On the surface, they were. But beneath that surface, the conversations had already begun. The calculations were already underway. Of the program's inner workings is that Cheryl Reeve's departure from her role with Team USA was not the clean, self-directed conclusion that official statements implied. The language of those statements was diplomatic, as it invariably is in situations like this. It spoke of transitions, of new chapters, of gratitude for service given. What it didn't speak of was the sustained institutional pressure that had made Reeve's continued presence at the top of the program increasingly difficult to justify in rooms where commercial considerations sit alongside competitive ones. This was not a coach deciding her moment had passed and walking away on her own terms. The ground beneath her had shifted, and it had. Let that settle for a moment. A coach who won gold, a coach with one of the most decorated resumes in the history of women's basketball. A coach who had done exactly what she was brought in to do, build a team, prepare it, lead it, and win with it, was effectively pushed out because the public narrative had made her continued presence at the top of the program too expensive to maintain. Not too expensive in basketball terms, too expensive in every other term that matters to the people who control the funding and manage the federation's relationship with its audience. The return on investment calculation had shifted, and Reeve, through no failure of her own on the competitive side, had ended up on the wrong side of it. And at the center of that narrative, Caitlyn Clark, not Clark herself. To be entirely clear, there is no credible evidence that Clark orchestrated, encouraged, or in any way directed the campaign against Reeve. Clark has been consistently professional in her public statements, consistently focused on her own game, and consistently unwilling to insert herself into the media circus that surrounded the Team USA situation. But the cultural force that had coalesced around her, the widespread conviction among millions of fans that she was the undeniable future of American women's basketball, and that anyone standing between her and a Team USA uniform was by definition an obstacle to progress, that social media era has an insatiable hunger for clean stories. The young star held back by the jealous establishment, the future in conflict with the past, the hero versus the villain. These narratives move at extraordinary speed. They generate massive engagement. They feed the algorithm perfectly, and they are almost never the complete truth about anything. The complete truth is almost always more complicated, more genuinely elite, and their accomplishments deserve to stand on their own merit rather than be dismissed as political maneuvering. The complete truth about Caitlyn Clark is that she too is genuinely elite, and her exclusion from the Olympic squad warranted serious, honest examination. And the complete truth and how it makes choices under pressure. It is a decision about whether the program can successfully absorb the commercial and cultural reality of Caitlyn Clark's presence while preserving the competitive standards and institutional knowledge that made Team USA the dominant force in international women's basketball for 3 straight decades. Get that balance right, and you potentially have the most formidable women's basketball team ever assembled. Get it wrong, and you risk fracturing the program's culture at the exact moment its visibility has never been greater, and any time, the moment they become the wrong kind of story.